I do know when there's food, it's virtually impossible to get us to start on time. So I appreciate, however, that we have now found a seat and gathered together and have a chance just to be with one another. So welcome to a community conversation here at St. Bartholomew's. As most of you already know, community conversations at St. Bartholomew's happen when we have an important topic or an important decision to consider. And so here at St. Bartholomew's Church, we welcome everyone into that conversation. We benefit from the gift of being able to discern the work of the Holy Spirit when we gather together. And so that is what we do when we have a community conversation. In particular, the community conversations that we are having right now have to do with the clergy options that we have in front of us, given my duration of time here, that I am 71.75 years old, and that it's important for us always to be thinking about what is right and what is best for St. Bartholomew's as we continue to move forward. And so we're having a community conversations about clergy options for St. B's as we think positively and joyfully about where we are going forward and how best to move forward. So 2 weeks ago, we had a community conversation that got us started. We were able to look at a number of options that were being considered through the work of the wardens and the vestry, and we had a chance to hear back your questions and your comments and your concerns, all of which was videoed and is on the website in case you ever want to go back and refresh your memory. We will be videoing today as well, again, for those who can't be here, but also just for our sense of being able to hear the trajectory of our comments and our thoughts. The purpose of today's community conversation is to continue the conversation, right? To continue how we are listening carefully to the Holy Spirit, how we are listening carefully to one another, and how we are imagining how to move forward at St. Bartholomew's in a way that is strong, intentional, and full of grace. And so today, we have actually narrowed things down. We've gotten a little bit sharper in our presentation about what we might want to consider. And so we'll have a chance today to spend a little bit of time doing that so that we can sort of be perhaps more focused. And then after a chance for questions and comments from any of you and from those on Zoom, then we're hoping to maybe have a time for you to be in some smaller groups, whether on Zoom or here on site, just to begin to sort of share together with a smaller group of people, and then to have a chance to hear back, and then we'll decide what our next step is. So that's what we're doing here today. And Angel?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'm Angel Jackson, this year's senior warden, for those who may not remember. I know some of you have short memories. Everyone should have picked up a copy of today's handout. This is slightly revised from last week, so it should read Community Conversation 2. Please raise your hand if you need a handout. Anyone else?
And if anyone would like a handout from last week, just let us know, because we do have copies of that also still here. No, they're right up here. Last week's are up here.
Oh, it's last week. I can't remember. Okay, regarding logistics for today, Zoomers, if to keep the conversation orderly, Zoomer participants will remain muted during the discussion. If you wish to share questions or comments, please raise your hand feature in Zoom. Our moderator, Michael Mountain, the trustee Michael Mountain, will call on you and invite you to unmute at the appropriate time. If you are unable to use the raise your hand feature, you can type your question or comments into the chat box and Michael will read them. Okay, so last time we did develop a list of norms, the conditions for participating in today's conversation, and I'll review them, and then if you have others that you would like to add, we can do that as well. So our norms from last time were to repeat respect, Gee, Michael.
It's my handwriting.
Respect all opinions. Zoomers, please ID. Oh, Zoomers will be identified when they present a question. We'll call on them by name. Zoomers, no side conversations and no side conversations here as well. Let's all be focused on today's conversation. One voice at a time. Please use I statements. Share discomfort in a timely way and mute your phones. What's that noise? Okay. And are there any? Yeah. Are there any norms you would like to add to this list? Anyone? Okay, they will be appropriate for today. Any comments from the Zoomers, Michael? Okay. So as always, we will begin with a prayer. Let us pray. Dear God of all creation, we thank you for who you are and for all that you have provided. Bless us, hold us, and keep us, that we might be ready to do all that you have prepared us to do. Speak to our hearts, dear God, for we are listening. Direct us to the fulfilling of your purpose. Allow us to accomplish with integrity and courage all that you would have us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, Michael.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Sarbanes, the junior warden, and we're going to walk through a shorter presentation than the last time. So part of sort of our experience in this process so far is every time we have a conversation, people ask really good questions, have ideas, and then things clarify a little bit. Like it gets a little bit clearer as to what the possibilities are. And then we can kind of come back to it and then see if there are other questions or other thoughts that arise. So we're going to walk through this one. It's only about 6 slides this time. The details from the other one, we have some of the stuff at the end. And if there's anything from the last conversation that people are like, well, I had this question from the last time, we can go back and look at it. All right, so everybody's got this? All right, so we're going to walk through this. The guiding norms, we've talked about, well, this is the same from the last time, but be faithful, be fair, seek what's beneficial to St. Bees in the long term, opportunities for collaborative consultation, that's part of what we're involved in right now, be clear and transparent about the process options and reasoning, again, that's part of what we're involved in right now, and be intentional about where and how information is shared, and honor different feelings about how people process change. So that's same norms from guiding the process from the last time. So last time we talked about 4 kind of very broad options. This time we're going to try to sort of narrow that down based on some feedback and some questions that arose and say, well, what would this really mean? And so we're going to try to kind of focus in a little bit. But just to refresh people's recollection, last time we talked about the flow, we called it flow forever. This is good, let's just stay here. And we're going to try to clarify what does that actually mean a little bit today. Option 2 was find the next rector for St. Bees. This is a good time for us to be looking for somebody, and we do the sort of normative search. Option 3 is some kind of handoff, some version of co-rectorship or priest in charge. And then we had an option 4 in case anybody had some other idea, but nothing really has surfaced yet. So that's sort of what we talked about last time. And you'll remember we went through the pluses and minuses on each, and then we got some feedback on those. So switching over now to page 4. So we thought that to clarify the options, and this was based on some of the questions from last time and some of the things that came up, that it would be helpful to sort of really try to focus ourselves. And there's sort of 2, if you think about a path, there's 2 paths we could look at right now. So one is that flow stays for a limited period of time, and we're going to talk about that in a second. The flow stays is either the path of an associate rector or a path of a co-rector, okay? the flow leaves and we hire an interim, and we're going to talk today, we're going to get some input from Thelma about what actually is an interim, because it's not something that we've dealt with at St. Bede's for a long time. So what is involved in that? Flow leaves, an interim is hired, and that could either be the full search or a priest in charge search. So that's kind of, if you think about it in that way, there's two sets of options. There's the sort of flow stays for some period of time, or flows leaves and we hire an interim rector, okay? And we're gonna kind of spell those out a little bit. So if you look on page 5, this is the sort of flow stays path, but we're sort of amending that. And some of this is part of in the discussion is, it's also been, I think, helpful, and Flo, you can comment on this later, to Flo to really think about, okay, well, what would this mean? And what am I, where am I? So kind of part of the dynamic in the conversation has been to clarify for her a little bit as well. So we're calling this now flow stays for a little while. So one path in this is an associate rector. So St. Bede's would hire a full-time, top-notch associate rector. That is a more senior person than an assistant rector, but probably more junior than someone who would be a co-rector. Is that right? Okay. Flow's time would be significantly reduced. There would be a clarification of roles within the vestry, but Flow's role would decrease pretty significantly when that person comes on board. If we end up liking the person after a period of time, we could move to make them rector. If we don't think that they're the right person to be the next rector, then we do the full search process. An associate rector is not tenured, so they're hired by the rector, and it's not the case that once you've hired them, there's this whole other process that they're basically here until there's some process with the diocese. And flow would continue for a limited time. We're talking about 1 year maximum, outside, 2 years maximum with the associate rector path. And the time frames there is really based on kind of how Flo was discerning where she sort of felt like what felt right to her. The other process in the flow stays for a little while is the co-rector. And that would be a full search process. We would hire someone to come in and work with a flow for 6 months, up to a year maybe, and then they become the rector at that point. Flo would decrease her time immediately on hiring a co-rector. The co-rector would be tenured. So it's probably somebody a little more senior than the associate rector, and when they're hired, they are tenured, and that's the next rector. And you're just having a transition process. The financial dimension of this is like still to be determined exactly. There would be a saving of money because Flo's time would be reduced, and your pension kicks in June, so that July, so the pension costs would be reduced. But we would be adding the additional cost of a full-time associate rector or co-rector. Okay, so that's kind of trying to clarify those options. That's the flow stays for a little while option. Do you want to say anything about those two, and then we'll talk about the next one?
So one of the things that has been really helpful to me in our process, which I am deeply appreciative of, is getting some more clarity for myself. And one of the pieces of clarity is, as I mentioned last time, is that I am hopeful that my tenacious work schedule can be relieved a bit. And so if the path forward, what's best for us is that I stay, then I think the excitement about that is that we would then have the opportunity to think very creatively about how we want to structure St. Bartholomew's Church, particularly in terms of lay leadership, which is already strong, but could even rise more, right? And how would we also restructure the clergy leadership? And what I am suggesting to you all is that if I stay, because that's what we deem is the best path forward, that we need to have an additional clergy person here at St. Bartholomew's. And if that person comes, then we would work out with incredible clarity about who is doing what, who is primarily responsible for certain things, even though I would remain as the rector. but it would give us all a chance to hire a really strong possible associate rector who already has the gift of some experience in the church and is excited about coming to a congregation like St. Bartholomew's and is really ready to rise into that role and to take on some significant responsibilities. Or if we go ahead and hire somebody who would become a co-rector, then that person would come in as well and have a chance to do a little bit of transfer. So I just want to be clear that when we're looking at that path, if I stay, there is going to be, I think, some pretty intriguing and significant ways that we would restructure and re-understand how we function together, and we would have absolute clarity about that and what is my role as a rector and what is the role of an associate rector or a possible co-rector. So I just want to be really clear about that.
Okay, and we don't have a number on the financial costs, but there's sort of ballpark things that could go into the thinking about it.
Can I just say something about
Yeah,
that?
you might say-
Sorry.
sure, go
So just so you are aware, July 1st, y'all don't have to pay my pension payment anymore because I'll be getting my pension from the church pension fund. So that actually is going to come off of the budget even for this year. But as I would begin to decrease, my salary would therefore decrease, correct? And that creates a wonderful space for whoever you would hire next. And the diocese provides guidance on that, so we would have the ability to be able to plot out who are we looking for and how much would we want to make sure that we supported that individual. I want to say that you have a wonderful history here at St. Bartholomew's of being very thoughtful and kind about your staff, and you have continued to rise for the staff throughout my time here, so I know that you would continue to do that. But there actually are some guidelines that we could use to do that, and if we go that path, we'll just be more clear about it.
Okay. All right, I'm now on to page 6. And this is the sort of flow leaves, and we have an interim pastor. What this would mean is we go into more or less the normative process for finding a new rector or priest in charge. And remember we talked about the last time, new rector is basically sort of a very broad search. You're trying to looking anywhere that we could find somebody. Priest in charge is a process that is more involved with the diocese and would be a collaborative process with the diocese, but it would be choosing from a list of names that the diocese would be suggesting. But this would involve having an interim rector while a search process occurs. And one of the questions the last time, it's come up a couple times, is like, well, okay, interim rector, what does that really mean? What are the possibilities? And it's not necessarily something that many people have experience with because we haven't had a search process for 20 years. But we happen to have a great resource in-house in that Thelma is a very gifted interim rector who knows that role really well and can explain. She would not be an option for our interim rector, but to explain kind of how does that work and what is that, what might that mean? And we have her on Zoom, is that right? So Thelma's ready to go. You're now going to watch the screen. And hi, Thelma.
Hello, I'm here, down in Tennessee. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me? All right, I want to just say, first of all, I just want to give you a tidbit of why I have an experience. And I served as an interim rector at 7 different churches. From 7. From a time of some churches as small as 80 average attendance on Sunday, and some much, much larger, one over 500 on a Sunday. I had a staff where I was the only full-time person with 1 or 2 part-time to a staff of over 20. So I've had a great range of interim experiences in 3 dioceses. And the most important thing I want you to hear is that I loved being an interim rector. And so you're going to hear it from somebody that loved being an interim rector. And I think most of my congregations, it was mutual. So that's what I want to base what I had, so you understand where I'm coming from. I love the fact that every parish was so different. different racially, culturally, economically. Some were in the city, some were rural. So I have this kind of overall picture of being an interim rector. So I want you to think about this as two pieces. The interim rector is like the priest in charge. You do all the priestly rector duties of the parish. But then there's the other hand where you do interim processing. And so I want to talk about these two separate ways of looking at the interim rector, and they just blend together as you have one. As the priest in charge, as any rector, you're in charge of pastoral care. You're in charge of the worship of the church. You meet with the vestry and the wardens and the staff. You're part of all that. You do weddings, you do funerals, you do baptisms. You participate in the life of the parish in various programs. You get to know the parish as well as you can in a period of about a year. That's about how long it takes. So you do the kinds of things any rector does, but you do not vote. You're part of, you meet with the vestry, but you do not vote. As the interim, you don't make any decisions for the parish unless you're making them in conjunction with the vestry and the leadership of the parish. You're not part of the search committee, though you do help the search committee and the consultant do their work. So anyway, you can help the parish do that. That's part of your job as an interim. So an interim does the regular priestly work of the parish in conjunction with the lay leadership and other clergy you have and the staff and the vestry. So that's part of the interim job, okay? Now, here's the other part that's specific to being in a transition time. Your job as the interim is to give stability to the congregation so that you all as a congregation can do the work you need to do to call the next rector, to give you a sense of stability. And so that I am, when I'm an interim, I try to be a non-anxious presence and help you trust that God holds you in the palm of his, her hand and will lead you to the right place. I also, as an interim, my work to help identify the strengths with you, to identify the strengths of the congregation and how you can hold on to them and make them stronger. And I also help you identify what's not working so well, what needs help, what needs to be redone from a new perspective. That's the job of the interim, because as an interim, I can tell you, I ask tons and tons of questions. So not just so I hear the answers, but that you all hear each other's answers and begin to get a clearer picture of who you are as a congregation. And as soon as Flo walks out the door, if I were the interim, you are a brand new congregation, you know, because Flo, the leadership you've known for 20 years is not the same. And now you have to put up with me as the interim if I were the interim. The good news about that is if you don't really like me, guess what? I'll be gone in a year and you don't have to have me forever. And it's a given that I would be gone. So that's the good news of being an interim. So I also, as an interim, my job is to help you breathe. That is to let go of having Flo as your rector and to see yourselves in a new place. We go on. I laughed one time when I was interim at Redeemer in North Baltimore. We had a woman that had worked there for 30 years at the front desk. And somebody was saying something about an interim. She said, you know what? I have seen so priests come and go and come and go and come and go, but here we are. We are the Church of the Redeemer, you know, and we stay. So it's a process of helping you let go, but also to celebrate and take hold of the new person and be ready whenever that new rector comes. The job of the interim has helped you to help you get a realistic picture of who you have been, who you are now, and who you want to become. Realistic, remember, realistic. Who you were 10 years ago isn't who you are today. You know, and sometimes we get hooked up into one way of thinking, and it's hard to then get a new way, you know. Obviously, this will be time coming off of COVID, so you can't forget that there'll be a lot of thinking and work to do to figure out who you are as a congregation in a new world, in a really new world. Also a job of an interim is to help continue to raise up new leadership. Flo spoke about new leadership. Leadership always changes during transition times. Not everybody, but you know, people shift. Somebody says, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. This is a good time for me to do something different. You know, there's a lot of leadership shifts, and that's a good thing, I think. Let's see. Also, one last thing I wanted to say, just to give you a general idea. During an interim, it's really important as an interim to allow congregations to have new ideas percolate and to try out some new ways of doing things, but not to put anything in cement. During an interim, there's never a first annual anything. It's a one-time thing. It's a time to try things out, do things differently. And some of you might decide later on when you get your new rector, you know, we tried this and we really liked it. We want to try it some more. So that's kind of how I look at an interim. So remember, there's two pieces. There's the interim rector. It gives you the stability of the things that are going on that a priest does and a rector does, but also helps you do that transition and move from one rector to another. So it's the kind of two pieces to the job. And it usually lasts about a year, maybe 15 months. The longest I ever did was 16 months. And the shortest was a year. So in between, that's how it is. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. And I guess Thelma would be available, if we have questions later, Thelma will be a resource on the screen.
Okay.
Okay, so that gives us a little more information to process, to think about. The goal for today, I just want to go through what else is in the back of this, but we're not going to go through the slides in any detail. Our goal for today is to do clarifying questions. See, are there other questions or things that people have come up with, thoughts that people have? And then we want to break into small groups with the idea that everybody's voice gets a chance to be heard, right? So, and sometimes working in small groups helps you to think through something that might be bubbling, but you're not ready to articulate it yet. And then we would go to vestry consideration of the input with Flo. We'll also have a conversation at the end. Should we have another conversation? Like, where are we in terms of this process? Just to flag the additional information that's in the back. So I'm on page 9 now. The kind of new rector normative process, if we went down that path, is on page 9. Just there's like we laid out 15 steps to it. On page 10 was some of the background on like why are we having this conversation now. We talked about that last time. Page 11 is the formal authorities, like who makes the decisions about the hiring. And I guess we should clarify on that. If we do the associate rector path, the rector does the hire, right? Okay.
So if we hire an associate rector, while it is true that that position would be hired by your rector, I want to be clear that's not a process that I would do by myself. We would all get together, we would have a group together to talk about what are we looking for, what are the attributes we're looking for, and how do we go about finding somebody like that. So while it is true that the individual is technically hired by the rector, it would not be me finding that person by myself. So that would be something we would continue to do collaboratively. But staff are hired technically by the rector, and the vestry gets to decide how much you're going to pay them.
And then for the other options, it would be the hiring decision would be by the vestry, right? For co-rector or rector.
Yes, because if you're going to hire a co-rector, you're somebody who's intentionally coming to enter into that position, then you are hiring somebody who is axiomatically tenured and And in both instances, the diocese will be involved because they have a chance to be able to do their own review of what it is that the parish wants to do. So I want to be clear about that. While if you're hiring a cleric, a clergy person, then the diocese has a say in that because they're coming into a bishop's diocese. So the bishop has a right to be able to have that review. And that would be true if it was an associate or a co-rector. But once you hire a co-rector, you really are into a tenured position. And that, as we talked about last time, has some extraordinary benefits and also some complications on occasion. But that would be a tenured position. But in both those instances, the bishop has the right to review the choice that you all want to make or we want to make. And assuming we get that, assuming we get the affirmation of that, the associate is technically hired by the rector, the co-rector is technically hired by the congregation because it's a tenured position.
Okay. And then the last page is, do you want a question now?
Gay, you have to come to the microphone, sorry.
Is this on?
Yep.
I assume when you say the vestry hires a new co-rector or new rector, that is on the recommendation of a search committee, that it's not the vestry who conducts the search.
That would be generally true, and I would recommend that in this case as well. It would be conceivable that the vestry could do the search, but I think the vestry has enough to do without doing the search. And I think the gift of having a search committee is that you can make sure it's diversified, right? And it's thinking about what the congregation is yearning to have in that position, and then they have the skill and the time to focus primarily on that, okay?
And if
If you're going to have a comment or question, you have to come to the microphones.
Gay, on page 9 in the new rector normative process, we talked about that it would involve hiring a search consultant, a profile committee, and a search committee. Then at the end of the process, the vestry has to make the formal decision.
So I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks since our last meeting, and what I'm wanting to understand, it looks to me like there would be a possibility, since it has this thing here called co-rector, where it says there's a full search process, that we could actually, I understood from Thelma what she was talking about the benefits of an interim, but it sounds like if we did something like this, it would be possible to have no interim, have flow here during the process while we do a full search, hire a rector, and that co-rector period could be 2 weeks. I mean, long enough for her to do a handoff or some training or something like that. And it wouldn't really have to be a side-by-side co-rectorship for a length of time. So it seems like that's sort of a hybrid of this co-rector or just hiring or going through the whole interim process where, is that, I guess the question is that a possibility, some kind of hybrid like that?
Yes, it is, if you choose to go that route. I think one of the questions that we have to really take seriously is the benefits that Thelma just described for you of having an interim rector. So part of this is trying to find for us how the Spirit is guiding us in terms of what we think is going to be best, in terms of what is faithful, fair, and best for St. Bartholomew's for the long haul. And so the hiring of a co-rector is indeed hiring somebody to assume that role as I leave. That can take as short or long time as you want it to, but there is a very different sense of that if I am still here as opposed to my leaving, and you have the freshness of an interim and a fresh sense of what that can do. So I don't want you to lose sight that either one of those has a very different feel to it and a very different sense about how free you are to ascertain the work of the Holy Spirit for the future of St. Bartholomew's Church. Right? Pluses and minuses on both.
And just to add one other thing we talked about the last time is that is the mic on? Yeah. Is it on now? No. Okay. The other thing we talked about, or the question with that is, if we do a search for a co-rector, do we end up with a different pool of people that might be interested in coming. With somebody, yeah,
Yes, yes, yeah,
right.
right. Yes. What Daphne's talking about is is a search essentially for your next rector while I am here, and which is accurate. I mean, she's got that nailed, right? I'm suggesting to you all, since we consider all options at St. Bartholomew's, we're trying to find our best way forward, is that there's a very different path, and it has some very different benefits depending on which path you would choose to take. But if you're hiring a co-rector, as I explained to you last time, there is a process that's beginning to happen in the Episcopal Church, and that is that sometimes congregations will hire an associate, and before you know it, the associate is now the co-rector, right? And as the rector leaves, they become the rector. So that is happening in some congregations in the Diocese of Maryland. So we're grabbing a piece of that, right, in either path we would take if I stay. Either one of those is a possibility. But if we go out and literally look for co-rector right now, then and I'm still here. The issue there is that I'm still here, as opposed to my being gone, and what the benefits of that are to your sense of being able to be really, really free to be clear about what you want to do. And that's, I think there's a case to be made for either one. Okay? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patricia Daniel, and I have comments to make rather than questions because I thought I was doing my homework based on what we shared for our first conversation.
You probably did.
So
Just making sure it's on.
A little
bit closer.
closer. Okay, thank you. So with that in mind, I'd say to Reverend Flo and to the wardens, I want to commend you on this process that you are sharing with the members of St. Bartholomew's. I have served as a member of the search committee, and I know that being very clear about your process and communicating whereby people have an opportunity to share, it's very vital to making a smooth transition. The options presented in the first conversation, I would say, are very praiseworthy. And notwithstanding the benefit or the heartfelt feelings that we have and sadness of Reverend Flo's not continuing as rector of St. Bartholomew's Church, because I said to her, I've just gotten here, and you're talking about making a transition. But at the end of the day, the reality is that Reverend Flo will retire. St. Bartholomew's Church cannot afford to dance with different clergy options, my feeling. Embracing the fact to hire a new rector is unconditional, based on conditions attendant to Reverend Flo's retirement and her desires. A shepherd for the people of St. Bartholomew's is required and needed to continue the rich tradition and foundation that Reverend Flo has provided throughout her ministry for the past 20 years. In addition, the landscape of the Episcopal Church has changed before and during the pandemic. Sustaining growth and development of the parish for the next 10 to 15 years will be very critical. Considering different options of pastoring other than option 2, in my opinion, may possibly lead to confusion, division, loss of parishioners, and upheaval during an interim period. Considering that, I would say that option 2 is the most viable option. Begin search for the new rector of St. Bartholomew's. Given the normative process outlined for finding a rector, I offer these suggestions for your consideration as a means to enhance and improve the quality of the process. Number 1, identify a beginning date and an ending date for the process to identify a new rector. Second, I would say the visioning process of St. Bartholomew's congregation is vital and essential for collecting, recording, and compiling information about the church. This can be accomplished through interviews with historians here in the church and information using a parish profile, a parish survey. The visioning process results in St. Bartholomew's profile. And if you think about it, how long has it been since you documented a telling of the story of St. Bartholomew's history, its celebrations, hopes, and dreams of the church? The profile should edify and should record the greatness of the people here and the clergy. The profile committee, in my opinion, should be members of the search committee. One chair should be selected for the search committee. Co-chairs could then head up subcommittees responsible for certain important tasks, such as including development of the profile, arranging site visits, organizing interviews, managing personnel confidentiality. And in my opinion, the hiring of a search consultant is a waste of time and money. Finally, I hope and pray that this process is a joyous one for all of us. Whenever I engage with Reverend Flo, whether through preparing for Sunday services through her emails or personal greetings, she's joyous. There's laughter. This week during my daily devotionals, one of the scriptures upon it included Exodus chapter 32, verse 9. And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is stiff-necked people. I was surprised about the use of these words, and I began thinking to myself, we can't be a people who are stiff-necked in this process. Let us remain joyful, agreeable, and intentional throughout our conversations and deliberations. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just like we have Thelma on interim experience, we have our expert on the interim, on the search process. How cool is that, right? And I would never accuse you all of being stiff-necked. Right? But what a gift to be able to have that knowledge now also for you to be able to put your arms around. So you've heard from two extremely experienced and wise characters who are part of this congregation who have shared with us both about the interim process but also about the profile and search process. So thank you, Patricia, very much.
Carol.
Not to confuse matters, but Carol Burnside. I do think it is clarifying the way that you have divided these two options, but it does leave out one very nuanced possibility, and I just want to point that out because there's some merit to it. You could have Flo stay and go with a priest in charge, and I realize that's a little kind of redundant in the sense of a rector and a priest in charge, but the reason that I mention this is because you certainly could have an associate rector, a non-tenured clergy person, who could then become priest in charge if you wanted that person to. And priest in charge often is functioning as an interim. Because a lot of times when we use a priest in charge in the church, there is a search. The priest in charge comes on a time-limited contract with the understanding that some interim tasks are done. It's like what Thelma referred to when she was talking about the interim part of the interim's job that's not the regular priest part. The grieving of the past, just the loss of someone who's loved and the end of a 20-year period that was fabulous. You know, even though we move on to another wonderful period, there is sadness with that, and there does need to be some communal grieving. An associate rector is not likely to have the training or the experience to do that kind of work. A co-rector that's not their job. A priest in charge isn't necessarily a good interim, but there are many priests in charge who have functioned as interims in situations where that person then has the option, if the congregation wants to be called as rector. Now, this is a lot of technical, nuanced, churchy things, but an interim, as such, cannot be called to be the next rector. So if you have a priest in charge, if you have an interim that you really like, you can't call them to be rector without a lot of, it can be done, but it's lots of gyrations and you don't want to go through it. But a priest in charge can do interim tasks and later be called to be rector. So if you went the direction of looking for a priest in charge while Flo is here, and there was a clear delineation, as Flo said, between the duties of each and the responsibility of each and the authority of each, the advantage would be that once Flo, that there's all the advantage of keeping Flo for a while, as was discussed thoroughly last time, plus the advantage of once Flo leaves, you have a person who's not tenured, could do interim work, and also could become the next rector. So that gives you a lot of options that none of these do give you. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then as a person who has had interim training and a little bit of experience being an interim, not much, I want to say this about an interim. It's a very, very crucial ministry in the church. People specialize in it, and people who have the training and specialize in it, as Thelma did for a while, are invaluable to the church. A lot of times, as you know, Thelma said, the advantage is if you don't like them, they'll be gone in a year. A lot of times people don't like the interim, and the reason is because the interim has tasks to do that might not be liked by the congregation. I don't think that's a real big issue here because of the nature of the congregation, the maturity of the people, and the community. But just as a little snippet, and this helps me to understand interim, when I took interim training, the Reader's Digest version of interim training is, when you're the interim, your primary job is to take care of anything that could possibly get the next rector fired. So in other words, like, I know you all have gone through a separation that was painful. You know, a good interim, I'm not faulting whoever was the interim, because I certainly wouldn't do that, but a good interim could possibly prevent something like that from happening again by dealing with stuff. And you might not like that person because they deal with stuff that you don't want to deal with, but they are serving a particular purpose. And so, as Thelma said, you just wait them out. You do those tasks, you work through that, you trust that they are trained for your best interest, and then you move on.
Thank you, Carol. Michael? Oh, wait, Michael Mountain has it. Michael Haney and then Michael Mountain.
Yeah, good afternoon. Mike Haney. Some conversations are just over my head, so I'm going to simplify it. And I can't agree with Ms. Daniels even more regarding the process. Wonderful process, intriguing options. And when it comes down to me, for me, not understanding what the end goal of today is for these two processes, it's cost. So for me to have all the information to discern for a parish that runs a deficit budget or faith budget, which is a deficit budget, for me to make a great decision on what option is best, what does that look like from a cost standpoint for this parish? I think I understand that associate means that there'll be someone working with Flo to alleviate her workload, I think, that we would be taking on that as an expense, and then and I can imagine at that level there's a different cost. And then I think that the co-rector is almost equal, or as Flo said, full tenured, and even though we would be losing some costs associated with her time commitment because we're co-rectored, where does that take us, so that, some good decisions could be made, and moreover, what personalities or experiences are available at each level and what they would cost, so that we could really nail down what would be a benefit and value based on what we can get. So love the process. Just want to know what today entails and what the end game is, so that I know that I can make a decision with some information that's important to me and I think important to the parish.
Okay. Wanna share something?
Okay, so the purpose of today was to provide a little bit more clarity about the choices and the options, and to get a little bit more information about what some of those choices and options are, which is why we asked Thelma to come and join in the process to explain a little bit about interims. Patricia just explained to us a little bit about how one goes through a search process within a congregation. The purpose of today is to continue to make sure that you as a congregation are getting the fullness of the information that we can share with you, so you understand what each choice might entail. We do not have the capacity yet to be uber specific, because that's part of how we start narrowing down the choices till we begin to figure out how we want to move forward. So the purpose of today was to allow the choices that we have been exploring to have a bit more clarity and certainly a more concrete information. And depending on how the conversations are going, how is the Holy Spirit moving you? What is occurring to you? What is happening to you? It is not about making a decision today. This is not about deciding today in a vote which way we're going to go. It is about being able to listen carefully to each other and to have the opportunity to hear as much information as we can, and then to listen to one another about where your heart and your spirit is. I want to be clear with you all, St. Bartholomew's, this is financial. St. Bartholomew's is a transition congregation. We have, transitional congregations have an ASA of 141 to 225. Our average Sunday attendance last year was 155 in the middle of a pandemic. We are clearly a transitional parish. In a transitional parish, or in any size parish, the diocese prints out charts that tell you what the salary ranges should be, all right? I've already indicated that beginning July 1, you will not be responsible for my pension payment, and as my time decreases, my salary decreases. But I can't tell you specifically what you're going to offer either an associate rector or a co-rector until we see what their experience is. If this is somebody who's never been a rector before, that's a very different salary range than somebody who's been a rector. If they've only been ordained for 5 years, that's a very different salary range than somebody who's been ordained 15 years. So in some of the ways that I know would be helpful to you in terms of financial parameters, some of those are very difficult to determine right at the moment. But we have the information to help us as we get focused on where it is we think we're being drawn. I know that for those of you who are very concrete, which your rector is not, that this is not helpful, and I understand that, but it's very hard to be more specific about what we would be offering somebody, because it really does depend on how long they've been ordained and what role they're going to fill at St. Bartholomew's Church. And I would also say to you, even if you hire somebody who's had a lot of experience, you're probably not going to hire them in at my salary. You're probably going to hire them in at a lower salary, because they haven't had the experience that I have had. Okay? I'm sorry, Michael, I can't be any more specific than that. Does that help at all?
Well,
Okay.
and Michael, the other one other
Well,
thing is,
Michael.
as we look at the options, one of the things we'll have to do is really cost it out. So we're gathering the information to be able to do that, but that's sort of like a next step in terms of nailing down specifics.
Okay, Michael Mountain has his hand up for some Zoomers.
Yeah, a couple of Zoom comments to catch up on. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear me on Zoom? Okay, great. Drew Brown has had her hand up patiently, so Drew, go ahead, and then I have a couple other comments to catch up on.
Hi, this is Drew Brown, and I've been here long enough to have seen 2 rector searches, and I hope that we maybe can ask the former search committees for any lessons learned in case there are things we might want to not think, things we know to avoid for this search.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, thanks, Drew.
Thank you. Okay, question from Cynthia Wagner, which I think we have an answer for. If we go the route of Flo leaves, do we get an interim after Flo leaves, and do we have a say as to who we get as an interim?
So the answer to that, Cynthia, is you absolutely have a say about what interim you get to hire. You would have a group of people who are clear about that's their role, is to find an interim. The blessing is that you have Thelma to guide you in that process, to make sure about who it is you're actually hiring as an interim, right? So it just gives you, I think, more confidence and a stronger sense about what is possible. And Thelma is pretty wise and pretty experienced and knows a whole lot of people. So you would have a group of people who would get together, determine what you were looking for in the interim rector, and then with Thelma's guidance, go find that interim rector. I'm sorry, what else did Cynthia ask? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that was basically it. Do we have a say as to who we get?
All right, good. So yes.
Yeah.
And I know. So yes, you're going to hire an interim rector while I'm walking out the door. All right? So if you're going to hire an interim rector, I am gone and the interim rector's right there. Okay? So I have nothing to do with the hiring of any interim rector at all. You need the freedom to decide how you're moving forward, and I need to not be lurking in the shadows. And so you will hire an interim rector to be right here as I leave. That interim rector is right here ready to go. So you would begin that process before I go, but I would have zero to do with it.
Great, thanks. And one other comment from Deirdre McElroy, who says, something that comes with St. Bees rector specifically is advising our funds committee, which oversees our $1 million plus parish investments and the endowment fund.
Correct.
This is an area where Flo shines, and an area that, depending on the succession plan, will call for clergy that can fulfill that role. So a financial education would be useful in the mix of clergy attributes.
You'll have all kinds of times and opportunities to make sure your druthers are slotted into a job description.
I want to share one comment that we received from Brian McKay, who asked it to be read, and then we'll keep going in here. So I'm just reading what Brian sent. He said, 2 observations regarding clergy transitions based on my time at St. Bees. First, although no one can replace Flo, there are excellent ordained ministers out there who can serve us well. In the 1990s, Tom Kreider Reed was a beloved rector at St. Bees with many skills whom most were sorry to see leave. So it's just a matter of finding the right person. That gives me hope in this scary time of transition. Second, although our last transition about 22 years ago was a disaster, one thing emerged from it. St. Bees knows itself as a resilient community with a strong sense of who we are and what our mission is. In that difficult time, we had strong lay leadership, the parish was almost 100% unified, and we lost very few people during a time when many other parishes might have been torn by dissension and tumbled into a steep decline. Thanks for considering my comments, Brian. So that was from Brian McKay. All right, Robin, you want to? Neva, you.
I want to say that I've been through the good, the bad, and the ugly of this process, coming from another congregation. So I have some questions based on what I'm not sure I heard during the last conversation. I think I understood that our bishop gave Flo an extension for her time where typically, my understanding is that once you are the age of retirement, that you usually have, and I'm only speaking from my experience, 3 months beyond that age to remain in the congregation.
That is correct.
Okay.
When I visited with Bishop Sutton last spring, so it's almost a year ago, I specifically asked him to give me and you permission to do our discernment together without the requirement that at 72 I have to stop. And he was gracious and gave it immediately.
Okay, so is that extension beyond the 3 months?
Oh, yes. It's to however long we
Good.
want this to go.
Thank you. Then
Now,
that,
once a year, he's going to be calling you and saying, do you still want her? And because that's also part of the requirement, is that he has to check in with you once a year and say, is she doddering? Is she drooling? Is she whatever? Or various other and sundry things I could imagine he would want to know about. But he would have to check in with you all once a year with the vestry and say, do you still want her? But it goes beyond the 3 months.
thank you. That's what I wanted to make sure I was clear in what I thought I heard and understood. So now, in understanding that, my other question is then, do we have and are we going to establish a timeline after, say, this conversation as to how long do we want this to continue? Do we want to set a timeline so that whichever option, and I think I heard Ms. Daniels say something about a timeline actually in the process of a search committee, but do we, and I'm speaking, want to set a timeline for whichever option we are going to take? And will that come after maybe this is the second conversation, third conversation? Not rushing anything, because now I have the full clarity as to the length of time that we can expect Flo to be here, but in all fairness to our current rector and some of the changes in demands that we probably, or let me say, I feel would be fair, we shouldn't set it too far out.
Okay. Very important question or comment. So there is a balance, I believe, in this process. By the way, this is probably why rectors hand in their letter of resignation, get in the pulpit and say, I'm going in 2 months. This is a really distinctive process. This is not a process that is normative in the Episcopal Church. It is an important process for this community because this is how we find consensus, right? And consensus matters. And the bigger the issue, the more important it is to find a greater sense of consensus. So the more important the issue and the more complicated the issue, the more important it is to find a level of consensus. It would be really easy to be able to say after 2 community conversations, we're done. The Wardens and I are going to go meet with the vestry. We'll let you know what we decide, right? But instead, there is a process that we are trying to craft so that we do not do this in perpetuity, but we do it sufficiently that we feel that we've had enough chance to hear from the people, from everybody, in a way that is beneficial to the process. Ultimately, this is a decision that actually your rector is going to make in some ways, right? In some ways, this is actually fundamentally and finally a decision for me to make, unless you all tell me to go, right? But this is our process to try to help everybody understand what the choices are, what each choice entails, so that as you begin to pray about this and think about this, you begin to have a chance to be able to share your thoughts and your feelings about it as well. How's this impacting you? And so the process that we're engaging in is a way to be able to make sure that we have information that we understand, that we can begin to recognize the pluses and minuses of the different choices, and that we have a chance to really receive that information, but also have a chance to talk about that with one another beyond just questions of clarification, so that we can begin to find some possible consensus. We may or may not ever be able to find full consensus about this, but that's an important part of this. So what I want to assure you all is we will not be doing this in perpetuity, but we will do it, I hope, just enough so that we have a chance to be able to hear one another, talk about this, and to be able to share our thoughts and particularly our feelings and our anxieties, but also our excitements, right? So that we can begin to find the right path forward. So I can't tell you immediately that we have it mapped out on a calendar. We're doing this, and no matter where we are, we're done. And therefore, we're going to do this. What I can tell you is, once we have a sense that that we've had sufficient of community conversations, this will be an ongoing conversation with the vestry, and when we come to a place where we're ready to actually think we can make a choice and a decision, there will absolutely be a timeline. There will absolutely be a time schedule. We're not going to make a decision and then just sort of twiddle our thumbs until it kind of happens. So at different points, we will try to be as thoroughly clear as we can be about, all right, this is where we are, this is where we're going, and oh, by the way, we're going to go there by then. I don't know how else to do that.
Just the other thing about this sort of process and these conversations is there's a clarification. And even if you look on page 5, there's sort of some time frames on the flow stays things that are more clear than they were when we began this process. And that's some of the flow sort of really, having her prayerful process about what feels right. So there's already, I think, there's sort of a clarification that I think is helpful to us in looking at the options.
In large measure, because as I told you all 2 weeks ago, I'm in discernment with you, right? Robin, sorry.
Robin Murray. Speaking of clarifications, I was listening to Carol Burnside and I was listening to Thelma, and I'm listening to this conversation about priest in charge, and I'm listening to this conversation about interim, and what I'm clearly hearing that the interim cannot be hired to be the priest. And then I ask you the question, Flo, because I know you came on board when there was no priest here, and I believe you were priest in charge, and we were able to keep you because of that. And if that had not been the case and you'd been an interim, wouldn't it have been a shame if you had not been able to be with us? Just wondering.
Okay. All right, so 20 years ago when I came to St. Bartholomew's, the term that often gets applied to my time with you initially was interim rector. I was never your interim rector. Never was your interim rector. I was what we called a short-term rector, because what I said to you all when I came was, I'm not here your interim. You're not going to outlast me, right? Thelma's comment, you can outlast an interim, right? I said, you're not going to outlast me. I am your short-term rector until the things that you have experienced are resolved and you're strong and you're ready to go forward. So what I basically said to you all was, I'm here till we do the work we need to do. And son of a gun, you guys did the work. And that's, at that point, we had a conversation about whether I could stay or not. And thankfully, we had a bishop at the time, Bob Eloff, who said, fine with me. And so we were able to go ahead and do that. Different bishops have very different perceptions and policies about that. And so I wouldn't want to ever make any presumptions about anything. But when I came, Robin, I came to be the short-term rector. And then it was clear that we could just continue on. By the way, that is not a technical term in the Episcopal Church per se. We do have short-term rectors because they just don't stay very long. But it is not, by and large, a term that we apply to somebody who's walking into a parish in the slough of despond. But that's what we use, because I knew that theologically, spiritually, and practically, that you all needed to know that I wasn't going anywhere, that I was here until things settled and you had the chance to re-rise. And so in that sense, I was not hired as the interim, although that was a term given to me, but I already had a different agreement with the diocese.
If I can just build on that, there's a couple of related questions in the chat that I'm hoping we can knock out altogether. Deirdre McElroy says, Flo gave us more time with her request to the bishop. We got a yes, discern yourselves. There is power, in my opinion, in having more time with Flo, provided we honor her desired exit to do newer things in her retired career. Are we going to drive Flo crazy if we ask for 1 or 2 more years? And similarly, Ronnie or Tim Wolf asks, am I alone in hearing strongly between the lines that Flo prefers an interim? We need to hear what is good for St. Bees and for Flo.
I don't know. That's why we're having these conversations. I mean it when I say to you all, I'm in discernment with you. My time after the last conversation to when I met with the wardens to prepare for this helped me get much clearer. And I'm presuming that I will continue in this with you. And so I'm presuming that we are doing this mutually. And how cool is that? I think that's all right. You all may be just thinking, oh, Lord Florence, just make up your mind. But I really want to do this with you because I think it's for the benefit for the long haul, for the longer haul.
And
Amanda Harris. I'm so thankful to Patricia Daniels for outlining so clearly the process. That was hugely helpful, and I agree with about 98% of what you said. Maybe 98.5. The only piece I don't agree with, based on our experience 22 years ago, is putting a date certain that the search would be over, because I think that may have been a factor 22 years ago in why, as Brian McKay so aptly put it, it was a disaster. And I'm hugely thankful to Thelma for being available to us to help choose an interim, because I think that will make a huge difference. The reason why although selfishly I would want Flo here forever and ever, but the reason why I think an interim is a better option for us is it gives us time to stop thinking and saying, well, that's not the way Flo did it, which is not healthy. But we need time to get that out of our systems. And, pound it into the new rector that we're going to keep some of the things, but also be open to the new rector in hearing the new wonderful ideas that the new rector has.
Let me just say one other quick thing about that Amanda raises, which is about a search process. I think I've tried to be really clear with you all. You don't settle. You do not settle. If you put a time end on a search, then you are going to make a decision with whatever it is that you have, whether it's what you ultimately really want or not. And I'm going to say to you over and over and over again, when you hire a rector, what happens? They are tenured. It's not a testing time. And so you need to hold in your hearts and in your spirits that you don't settle. And in the other part of that I think is critical is if you have a search committee, because search committees get tired, right? You can get tired, and at a certain point, the search committee says, I really don't want to do this anymore, and so you make a decision. What I'm going to say to you is, if you have a search committee that's tired, let them go and put another one together. You don't start the search process over, it's just another group of people taking it forward with refreshed energy. And this is a congregation where I'm banking y'all are going to have pretty strong consensus about what you're looking for. And so you don't settle. You go after what you want because you deserve that, because this parish should have that. And if you get partway through and your search committee is looking at you and you can tell they're drooping, right? They're sagging. You say, God bless you for what you've done. Thank you for not making a preemptive decision. And oh, by the way, Patricia Daniel is going to lead the next batch.
Thanks for volunteering. Pat?
I get that as my gift for my birthday.
Yes, that's right.
Oh. Well, I'm Patricia Alt, although I mostly go by Pat. It's been a really amazing series of discussions, and the question I have had since early in this process today was somebody mentioned that the bishop's role in it, and that the bishop could make choices or could say you can't do this, you can't do that. And I was curious about, since there is a bishop search going on, do we need to wait till after they get a new bishop and then deal with that person? Or if the current bishop, I mean, it feels like kind of a mush. And
Okay. That's actually a pretty interesting question, to be honest with you. So let me be clear, we are in the middle of a search process for a new diocesan bishop. Michael, you have your hand up? Okay, we are in the middle of a search for a new diocesan bishop. The election will be in 2023, and that person will assume the role of coadjutor, which means that they are like a co-rector, if you will, within the Episcopal tradition. And they will serve in that capacity with Bishop Sutton until the point at which he's ready. He retires in 2024, and then that person immediately becomes the diocesan bishop. The really good news is that we actually have a bishop in the house today. Chilton's here, so I keep looking at her in case I'm like way off base. And so far she hasn't had to open her mouth, which is, I think, a good thing. So I want to be really clear that whatever process we begin, my presumption is that a new diocesan bishop will sweep up what is already in place and will not come in and change everything at the last minute. I just don't think that's either productive or appropriate to do. And my hunch is that if we make this decision sometime this spring, that you will be well on your way. We will be well on our way to whatever we're going to be doing long before that person becomes the diocesan bishop.
Yeah, Tim Wolf's got his hand up here on Zoom, if I can jump in.
Okay.
Tim.
I just want to make clear what I was saying. I know there are fish who are dying of striped bass, eager to meet Flo in New Zealand. And I know Flo is eager to meet those fish. So let us not forget what Flo wants, and let's be fair to liberate Flo and liberate us in the process.
Okay. Oh. Thank you, Tim. And I'm assuming that we will make a very good decision collectively. But I appreciate, and I do want to say this, that all along in this whole process, I want to be clear that all of you have been so gracious to me about recognizing what is important and valuable to me. You have been exceptionally kind, thoughtful, and you have not ever put aside what perhaps it is that I want. And I appreciate that as I figure out what it is I want, that you have just been very receptive to that and very kind and very thoughtful about it. Very, very thoughtful about it. I'm not unappreciative of that.
Hi, Susan Lundeen. 2 weeks ago, you had said something about one of these choices. I got the impression that it wasn't a position that people really wanted to take because they didn't want to come and spend time doing it because then they knew they might be out of a job. Was that the associate rector?
No. The question was asked me, if we want a co-rector, is it going to be possible? And what I said was, there was a time in my life where I would have never chosen to be a co-rector because I would have been really curious about why you weren't willing to just hire me as your rector, right? So the presumption would have been, if you wanted me to come and be your co-rector, that you really weren't sure you really wanted me, and why was I going to come and do that, particularly since I have had rector experience. So the question that was asked of me is, would I have chosen to be a co-rector of a congregation when I have already been a rector? And I would be very curious, why are you asking me to do that? The difference, I think, here around that would be that St. Bartholomew's is not totally unique, but it is a bit distinctive. And so the question would be, is there somebody out there who would really love to be rector of a congregation like this and wants to come and figure out what it is that I've done so they can grab hold of that, and we can do that a little bit together, and then I can leave, and then they're ready to walk right in. So I think it depends on how you would present that, whether or not you would find the kind of individual that you would be looking for to be co-rector. I'm just saying it is a unique opportunity. It's very rare that you go out and I don't know that it's ever happened, where you go out and you say, oh my gosh, Angel, you've been an outstanding rector. Would you please come and be a co-rector at St. Bartholomew's? And Angel's sitting there saying, I am an outstanding rector, so why would I want to be co-rector, right? And so that would have to be, I think, a very distinctive search. And there also are ways to do a search that narrow down your focus considerably. Did I tell you about the call I got from the Midwest last time? Okay, so after I'd been here at St. Bartholomew's for a while, I got a phone call from a church in the Midwest. And they said, we would like you to consider placing your name as rector of our parish. And I said, why? And they said, because you've rectored a church that has grown. And so it is clear to me that what they did was they figured out what they wanted to do, what they were looking for, and they went to the national church and they said, show us the people. That number one on their list was people who have rectored a parish and grow. And they said, show us the people who've been rector of a parish that has grown and these other things. And we're going to call those characters and ask them to put their name in. So there are ways to also do your search that isn't just a generic search, but it can be very focused and very specific. Okay?
And just one more quick question. I know a lot of times when we have decisions here, we all sit here and raise our hand and, raise your hand if you're for this. Is that how you will, as a vestry, get the gist of what the church wants? Will it be a secret ballot that we can just write something down and pass it to you? Because as a vestry, you're going to want to know what we all want for you to discuss and figure out what the best choice is.
Yeah, I think when we talked, Angel and Flo and I, we're not quite sure exactly what that process will be now. We're trying to get a sense out of the conversations, and then we'll kind of go back and talk with the vestry about we're trying to reach a point where everybody understands all the information. So everybody's kind of like operating on the same sheet of music, and then get as close to a consensus as we can to move forward. But we haven't sort of finalized exactly what that process is.
I know years ago, I was the only person in the entire church that raised my hand I didn't want something. And all of a sudden I looked around, because that was the first question, and I still remember how bad I felt because nobody else was with me, and I wish I had pulled my hand down and joined the majority. Yeah. Because I was sitting right there. I even know where I was sitting when it happened. So I just don't want it to be something where people will look around and go, oh, everybody's raising their hand. I will too, and they don't really want that.
Yes, and I appreciate that, and I would want to say to you all, this is not a vote. This is not a congregational vote. We're not going to ask you at any time to say, Flo go, Flo stay. That's just, I don't see anything that is even remarkably spiritually probable about that or valuable. What we're looking for is consensus, and that doesn't mean everybody has to agree. We're looking for consensus, and your voices matter. They matter. How can we even begin to come to terms with these possibilities unless we hear from you all? You all don't have to agree. We've been really clear about that, but we need to hear, and we're trying to group grope. So this is not about, at the end of the time, everybody saying, Flo, go, right? And somebody says, no, Flo, stay, right? We're not doing that. We're looking for the ways in which your voices will help us be wiser about what it is we're trying to discern here. And that's really ultimately, as I said, that's a conversation we're having. It's a conversation the vestry and the wardens are having. And in the final analysis, it's a question that I will discern, because ultimately whether I stay or go is my decision. Unless I said, y'all say.
Yeah.
Hi, Gay Warshaw again. One thing that I just want to consider for myself, but also for others to think about, is if we are in the camp that we want a co-rector or an associate rector or something of that ilk, what does that say to the potential rector, co-rector, that we're not ready to move on? And I mean, granted, there will be work that we need to do in terms of grieving Flo's leaving, but what does that say to the next rector that we might hire?
Right, exactly. Okay, Nisette.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nisette Moody. I'm actually one of the members of the vestry as well. So I have a couple questions first and then comments. So I apologize if this is already answered earlier, but if we hire an interim, is there like interim rectors that are on standby? Like how soon, if you want that option, when does that happen? Or what's the process for that?
Right. Thelma can probably answer that a little bit better. Thelma, can you answer that question?
Well, usually the process starts with the diocesan person knows some interims that are available, and you can begin to, I don't know at this time who's available. I have looked around just out of my curiosity. So I can't give you a name right this minute. And it might take a little bit of time, but once you make that decision, you start doing it. And the interim doesn't have to live here. The interim they have down in Georgetown right now, he moved in for a year. He got an apartment. You got to pay housing. They moved here. So, you don't have to have somebody from right next door. So it's a process. Do I know who's waiting out there at the thing? I couldn't make that decision for you anyway. You all have to make that decision. But I'm keeping my eyes open right now and my ears. That's what I can tell you.
Once, if the decision is that I leave and we're going to hire an interim, you would start that process right away. You wouldn't wait till I leave to start that, and you would find the interim and you would say, Flo's departure date is ta-da, so we want you here to do, right? So you wouldn't wait for me to leave to hire the interim.
Okay, so from what I understood, that for the most part, it's not a very long process. There are people that are kind of somewhat on standby that could kind of fill in a few weeks, months, or kind of, right? So with that being said, and this is funny, I'm going after Gay because I heard your comment, Gay, but personal statement, I think because this is Flo, you're retiring. We're not necessarily in a bad position from what I'm hearing what happened 22 years ago. And no matter who's the person, interim, co-associate, whatever title the person is, we're going to always have these, well, that's not how Flo did it, or Flo did it different, no matter who the person is, good or bad, right? And so because of that, I don't see personally the harm in having Flo pass on the baton. I think Flo has done an extremely amazing job laying the foundation for St. Bede's. Personally, I would not like someone to come in and updo everything that she's done and go a completely different direction. While a new person will learn, I think, from Flo and take on certain things, they're still going to have their own way of doing things. Someone can be her. So we're going to have a new direction anyways. But I think personally having someone next to Flo to see how she's done certain things will be valuable for us as a community, as a church, and our sustainability. So I'm personally with one of the options of associate or a co. I think having an abrupt pause and then having someone here for a while and learning, getting used to them and getting somebody else is going to be a lot. I've been into a church where we had that before, and it was very uncertain. You had an interim that was there, and she was great, but we also knew that she was going to be leaving. So it made for a difficult time to really make connections. I think folks that were new to the church also heard that and were probably hesitant to stay because they liked this person. They knew she was going to be leaving. Who's a new person coming in? It was not a bad time, but it wasn't the best time either. And I think for a church as grounded as we are, that I think we deserve it for the future to have Flo work with said person, and then at the same time Flo taking steps back. I know she really wants to move on to New Zealand. If we're up to me, I'd have Flo stay forever, but that would be very personal and very selfish, only because I just love her so much. But that's just what I want to put out there. I wanted to understand the interim process and then give my 2 cents on having you kind of work with the passing the baton, but not so much of an abrupt end to your time here.
Okay,
so, thank you.
Gotcha. Thanks, Nisette. Okay, Ray?
Ray Ziegler. I first of all wanted to say I am so appreciative of the process that we're going through here. I have been through it. I was at a former parish where we had brought in not a consultant, but Thelma's position, and that was about 1.5 years, and I got to know this person very well, and we went through a careful process. And I came here today after having read the last handout, and I thought, oh, I think I know the direction we should go. I'm back in the soup. I know it needs more thought for me, and but I will say at the last parish where I was organist and choir director, we made a mistake. We had an excellent advice, but in fact, the chair of the committee came up to me a couple of months after hiring the new person and apologized and said, I'm terribly sorry. And the former rector went on to be bishop. And all of a sudden this was dumped in his lap. And it was a very interesting situation. I won't go on with it. But I will say we are extremely fortunate because the person who was there for the year and a half, who I got to know very well in that parish, happened to be Thelma Smullen. And we are so lucky to have her here and have her wisdom to help guide us in the process.
Thank you, Ray. It's almost 1:45, and Olivet Baptist Church is coming to worship here this afternoon. We had really hoped to be able to break down into some smaller groups to hear from everybody. Do you want to try it?
What do people think? I mean, the reason for doing the smaller groups is we wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to
just talk with each
talk.
other.
We could even do it for just talk to the people around you for 5 minutes and then come back together and then move on. Or a lot of people have spoken, so I'm
Or do you want to wait and do it the next time and basically come together the next time and spend time talking to each other?
You'll do it that way? Okay.
Will you come back for that? I'm serious about this. I understand that a lot of you are here to try to understand what in God's name we're talking about here, and I also understand that this is about how we're trying to find our way, and I understand that it is complicated, it is not simple, it's not exact, but if we're going to do that, and it's critical, I can't even begin to tell you how important it is that we get back together again and have conversations in some smaller groups where you all can listen to each other. And it's not because you're going to reach consensus. It's just you get to open your mouth and say, well, this or that or whatever. I need to know you all are going to come back. All right? And the people who are not here, you're going to go after to get them here. Your friends, your colleagues, the people who sit in the pew by you, right? Or you're on Zoom with Zoomers. It's really important that you are back as well. We know how to put you in breakout rooms. And again, it's not because you have to have consensus. It's just the opportunity for us to have the conversations in a smaller group, because I think sometimes those are a little bit different than what we're trying to do collectively here. Okay? Daphne.
I'm wondering if for the next time we could order pizza and have it over at the parish house and be at individual tables and, have a...
We might. The issue has to do with the numbers. And Daphne's asking if we could have it in the parish house with round tables for discussion. Part of this has to do with the numbers. And
the Zoom.
And the Zoomers. Well, we actually, Michael Mountain has perfected the ability to do Zoom well in the parish house if needs be. So we will have a conversation. I can assure you right now, it's not happening until after Easter. Just saying. So you have flow for a little while longer regardless. But before we go, I think I just want to thank you all.
Sorry, we do have one more hand up on Zoom,
Okay.
if we can go to that real quick. Adrian Barnes.
Okay.
Adrian, are you there? Give her a second.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Michael, for giving me the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to say that what was most important that I loved, I've been a member for over 2 years and had the blessings, Keith and I both, of being married by Flo. So we're so excited about that. Listening to the dynamics of the dialogue has been very interesting, and I'm learning a lot about the process and the engagement of it. But I wanted to say, whoever we get, this has been a big thing for me with Flo. Flo was very good at developing partnerships with the community around where St. Bede's sit. So that's going to be important. I think Thelma say that the person would have to come and move here for a year and be here, get an apartment, but their engagement with the community and becoming familiar will be as equally as important as well. Flo kept us engaged with activities that were going on in and around the city of Baltimore, ways that we can help, development of partnerships, engagement of organizations, bringing the pastors in that area together. I mean, that's just to name a few. So I would like someone who will be willing to engage and develop partnerships with the community, and to make sure that we are aware of what's going on around us and finding ways to help. Thank you so much again for getting my time. And Adrian Haney is my name. My husband is reminding me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes. So what Adrian is talking about, at least at the end piece there, is that what she really wants to make sure is that whoever is here is somebody who has the gifts and the skills to engage in the community and to understand what's happening in the world around us. So it's not somebody who's going to come in and just be St. Bees focused, but it's somebody who has the heart and the spirit and the skill to be able to reach out to the community at large and to make sure that we are doing collaborative ministry up and down the avenue. I don't think that's so that's also another piece that you are going to want to put in whatever job description you eventually you eventually put together. The thing that I love about some of these comments is it tells me you already have a heart and you already have some ideas about what you're looking for, and that those are things that are already deep inside of you, and I think that's exquisite. All right, I just want to end by saying y'all are awesome. This is an amazing. I know it's not crisp and clean and precise. I appreciate your tenacity and your perseverance to stay in the middle of this. I understand that this is perhaps a little bit more complicated than you all want, but think about what you're learning. You are learning some of the circumstances and factors that go into making these choices and these decisions. Very important. And therefore, to have the ability to think about that, and I want to remind you what is what? Faithful, fair, and the best for St. Bartholomew's for the long haul. So that's a critical piece of this. But before we go, we have somebody whose birthday it is today, and we have a wee one whose birthday it is today, Jackson's.
Jackson's 18 months today.
Well, that's worth a birthday. Oh, and Daphne's is tomorrow, so I think we ought to end by singing happy birthday, right? Don't you? All right, you don't even have to mask. Let's just sing happy birthday. Who's going to pitch it? Birthday to you. Happy birthday to all of you. Happy birthday, Patricia, Daphne, and Jackson. Happy birthday to you. Thanks, everybody.